Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Letter of Interest training for fiscal year 2024 planning grants with DEQ. My name is Zoe McCarty. I'm a grant and loan officer here at DEQ. We're going to start off today with some general housekeeping items for this presentation. Please keep in mind this training will be recording, and the link to this presentation will be emailed to those in attendance after the training. Presentation slides have also been made available on the DEQ registration page used to sign up for this course. At this time, all participants have been muted for the duration of the call. We ask that you enter any questions you may have in the chat box during the course of this training. All questions will be answered at the end. On the agenda today, we will be briefly introducing our team here at the state office, as well as an overview of the timeline and background pertaining to these planning grants. We'll then move into a review of the drinking water and wastewater planning grant letter of interest forms themselves, and finish with answering any questions you may have. At this time, I'll turn it over to our grants and loan supervisor, Charlie Parkins, who will be introducing our team.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Charlie Parkins. I'm the grant and loan supervisor. This slide is just an outline of the people in the grant and loan program. If you've sat in on any of the other LOI trainings for the loans, you will recognize some of these names and probably been able to put a face to some of these names. But anyways, we have Mariana Peavy, the grant and loan bureau chief. I'm Charlie Parkins, more of the drinking water loan side. We have Nicholas and Michael, the resident engineer specialist, LaDon Kaler, who oversees the environmental review process, Alicia, overseeing more of the wastewater loan side of things, Zoe McCarty, who has taken on the responsibility of handling all the grants that DEQ has been taking on this last couple of years, and then Garrett helping us with everything else that none of us, the rest of us, can do. So that is the grant and loan program. So the funding for the 2024 cycle coming off last year was the ARPA funding, the American Rescue Plan Act funding, where we had a kind of a banner year for the planning grants. We had several million set aside for the planning grants for 2024. Since we used up nearly all of that $5 million for the planning grants, we intend to switch back to the normal about $350,000 for planning grants on the drinking water side and the same on the wastewater side. If we do have some funding left over from the ARPA, we'll be able to roll that over into with the 350, but we're still kind of getting that out the door, so that's kind of up in the air. There's also a chance that we will be getting some funding from the state of Idaho. There's a question on the letter of interest indicating whether you'd like to be considered for that funding. I would encourage anybody that's submitting an LOI for a grant to go ahead and mark yes, because it just gives you access to another pot of money to help fund the planning grants that you might be going for. So this is just a 30,000 foot view of the timeline for the annual cycle for the grant and loan program. Starting back in October, we sent out notification that the LOI process would begin. In November, December, we hold a couple online trainings for the program. The letters of interest are due on January 13th. From there, we have about 6, 7, 8 weeks to review all the LOIs that we get. Around April, beginning of April, we put together the IUPs for the loans and the grant priority list for the grants. Around May, we present those lists to the DEQ board, and then around June, after the board approves the list, we will send out fundable letters, non-fundable letters, and finalize the priority list and the IUP. So that's kind of the timeline from a 30,000 foot view. To dive down a little deeper into how the priority list is put together. So again, once the LOIs are submitted on January 13th, We take all those LOIs and we rank them from severe issues all the way down to minor issues, and the systems that have, you know, the severe issues fall at the top of the list. And issues, like I said, we don't have a bottomless bag of money. So depending on how many LOIs we get, will determine how far we're able to work down that list. But basically, we put the list together. Again, it's just in a draft format. It goes out for public comment. If you submitted a letter of interest, that would be a good time to make sure that the LOI that you submitted is on those grant priority list and the amounts look correct and all that kind of stuff. From the public comment, like I said, it goes to the DEQ board. It's still in a draft form at that point, and then once the DEQ board approves it in May, that's when it's actually finalized. From my experience, there isn't much movement from the time that we put it out from public comment to the final draft, but it is possible for things to move around. So be sure to check with us if you don't know exactly where you fell. But that is how the grant priority list is developed. A little bit deeper dive into the actual rating of the LOIs, again, due January 13th. Please get those in by the due date. We get the LOIs, and it's a combination of the regional staff and the state staff reviewing all those letters of interest. The regional staff obviously has kind of on-the-ground experience with the systems and have a better idea of what's going on in detail with the systems. The few people that we have at the state is more just to make sure that we are ranking the systems the same way across the state. So if an LOI from Coeur d'Alene comes in and it has the same indications as one from, you know, Lewiston Regional Office or even down in Twin, we want to make sure that we're allocating the same points in the same fashion, just to make sure that everything is on a level playing field. So there's quite a bit of collaboration between the state office, the engineers, as well as the regional folks. And so the rating is done in a very level playing field kind of fashion. So the previous year, the 2023, we were able to remove the limits for the grants because we had kind of a banner year. We had an excessive amount of money able to fund all the planning grants. Now that the ARPA money is basically out the door, we're back to kind of the status quo, short of maybe getting some funding from the state or maybe even having a little bit left over. But the grant limits will be back into effect. If for some reason we do change that, we will notify the systems. But right now it looks like we'll proceed with the $65,000 max for the wastewater side and the $45,000 max on the drinking water side. Again, it's always been 50% of the planning grant, so DEQ will stick with that 50% of the total cost. And with that, I believe I'm turning it over to Michael to discuss some of the rules.
Yes, thank you, Charlie. Good morning, everyone. My name is Michael Stambulis. I work in the state office. As Charlie said, I participate in ranking the letters of interest with Nicholas and the regional representatives. I've been doing that for quite some time. Only to point out that it allows me to see a lot of what's going on in the state and to provide some, what I hope is valuable input to rank these systems and allocate the money to solve the biggest challenges that we have here in the state. But starting, first of all, we just like to point out that the questions that we ask on these letters of interests are developed from the rules. The rules for the administration of wastewater and drinking water loan funds and grants establish the points that we could allocate and the categories that we can allocate, under which we can allocate those points. So we start with that basis and we try to develop the questions to answer those categories that the rules point out. So the legislature establishes this and we work underneath those guidelines. The rating forms will be posted on DEQ's website if you need to access them. Let's see. There will also be links to the forms in the chat box if you want to follow along as we go through them. We're going to start by going through the drinking water planning grant letter of interest form. And as you'll see, as Charlie pointed out, the very first question is new, and it's asking about if you want to be eligible for Leading Idaho Initiative grant funding. If that funding becomes available, we recommend everybody selects yes, because more money means more opportunities for you to get funded. But then after that, we're just trying to get some background information to allow us to know where you're at in the process, who you are as well in requesting the money. Next slide, please. Also, we get at project readiness. We want to know if you are current with your payment of the annual fees. That is a requirement to get funding. And then also, how far are you along in the discussing your project with an engineer? Sometimes we do have timelines on certain pots of money that we have to get them out by and get them spent by a certain timeline. So we want to assess your project readiness to make sure that that money does get allocated to systems who are ready to spend it. And next, we'll talk a little bit about the state environmental review process.
Thanks, Mike. Good morning. I'm LaDawn Kaler here at the state office, and I oversee the state environmental review process for the grants and loans. So this is a really good timeline to give you a general idea of how this process takes place and when it takes place. So I often get looped in for the environmental review process right around the time that the facility plan is technically approved for public comment by DEQ, and that will happen at the regional office. Sometimes systems engineers will want to loop me in a little bit earlier than that. So if you've submitted the facility plan and you want an idea before it's been technically approved of what might be needed for an environmental determination, you can loop me in as soon as you want. So then after that technical approval, we'll have a scoping meeting and we'll talk about the different consultations that might be needed for the project and what's going to be needed for a determination. And then we'll talk about the public comment period and if the language English proficiency guidelines need to be followed, if you have a high population of those that speak something other than English for that area. And we'll talk about that then and what that means and what will be required for the public notice and public meeting. And then the public meeting can happen, final review can happen, we'll look it over, do a determination, a legal notice will be posted, the facility plan can be submitted for a final look through by the regional office, and that's kind of just a snapshot of that. And if you have any questions about that, you can reach out to me. Just to give you an idea of what we have completed for the last 5 years for determinations can be seen here. Most of the projects end up being a CADX. Most of them are replacement work or minimal disturbance or in an area where disturbance already occurred. And sometimes there are FONSIs. What we've seen lately are those can pop up when it comes to population growth. So if population growth is excessive, it might throw a project into a FONSI, but there's not too much more required for those.
And it's back to me to continue going over the grant letter of interest form. And my apologies, I forgot to highlight a question in the project readiness stage. It asks, do you intend to develop a lead service line inventory in part or whole with this planning effort? You may or may not be aware that the updated lead and copper rule and EPA are requiring that every system complete a lead service line inventory. The details are not completely fleshed out, but if you were ready to pursue that inventory and complete it as part of your planning effort, you can either look at the supplemental training that we did a few weeks ago or give us a call. We would love to work with you and provide some insight as to how we might be able to provide some funding to complete that work. So back to where we're at right now, we've gotten the background information, and we're starting to ask some questions on what exactly is going on with your system. The drinking water grant and loans focus on public health hazards. So these first questions are about things that are going wrong in your system that are actual public health threats, starting with acute contaminant violations or chronic contaminant violations. So those will be your E. coli, nitrate, or nitrate MCLs, or more of the chronics like arsenic or something along those lines. We also get into surface water treatment technique violations if you have a surface water source, or if you have a groundwater source that's recently been designated a surface water source and it doesn't have yet filtration. These are the areas of the forms where you'll get the most points, because we feel that these are the items that need to be addressed as soon as possible. Continuing with that theme, another area of concern is if you have frequent depressurizations. Won't get into why that is a health concern, but if your system is having frequent depressurizations and you have some documentation amongst to demonstrate that to us, that'll also get you scored pretty well. Another one that going on is that if you're losing source capacity. A few years ago, when we had that major earthquake, a lot of systems wells were damaged and they lost that source capacity. That is kind of where we're getting at, not that you don't have enough capacity because you didn't drill enough wells, but that you had adequate capacity and it's decreasing for whatever reason. Then we have the question 4 is more of a catch-all. Do you have anything else that is causing a risk to health and safety? Perhaps it was designated in a significant deficiency and is yet to be resolved. And then the final question on this is regarding unregulated contaminants that have been shown by EPA to be a risk to public health. Once again, in supplemental training, we go over some of this that might have other bags of money that you can get to address some of these contaminants as well. So that's section A. Section B is getting to, we just have issues in our facilities. We don't believe that they're rising to the concern of public health, but if we don't address these, they might get there. Starting with treatment deficiencies, if you have treatment and your facilities do not meet the requirements of the Idaho rules for public drinking water systems, but the fact that they don't meet those requirements are not causing MCL exceedances, question 1A gets at that. And that's the theme for the rest of this section. If you've filled out LOIs in the past, you'll see that we've kind of streamlined this section a little bit to try and reduce the number of questions and just lump questions together that made more sense. But you'll see we talk about source deficiencies, such as reduction in source capacity, but that's not causing a public health threat. And then deficiencies that are not significant deficiencies, these would be leaking lines, but that aren't necessarily causing depressurization, leaking storage tanks, things along those lines. Question 4 gets at redundancy, which is required by rule if you are a new system, but perhaps you're an older system and you weren't required to have redundant sources at that time, but redundancy is a very important aspect of any system, so we want to encourage that as well. Now I'm going to turn it over to Nicholas to talk about one of his favorite topics, the green infrastructure efforts.
All right, thank you, Mike. So we are moving on here to section 2C, which is sustainability or the Green Project Reserve Infrastructure. And so as you might know, as part of the funding that DEQ receives through EPA, we are required to allocate a certain percentage towards these sustainability efforts. And so part of that process is soliciting sustainability efforts, giving you the opportunity to commit to some of these eligible components within a project. So there's 4 categories. The first one being the management-based or innovative efforts, and you can receive 5 points for each one of these components that you sign up for. and you can receive only a maximum of 50 points. So in other words, if you sign up for all of the Green Project Reserve sustainability efforts, you're only going to get 50 points. But if you sign up for 10 of these items, you'll still get 50 points. And so we encourage people to pick and choose the components that you'll plan on evaluating as part of this planning grant. And some of these make more sense for your context and your specific facility. So you can see under question 1A, it asks if you're going to develop an ongoing capital improvement plan or update that as part of a capital improvement plan budget. So fairly straightforward. If your facility plan is going to include that, go ahead and click that box and get your 5 points. Moving on to the next slide, you can see that the items continue. There's a number of management-based components that you can sign up for here. I'm not going to read through all of them, but take a look through those as you fill out these LOIs and select the ones that make sense to incorporate into your facility plan. The next section under the Green Project Reserve is green efforts, and so that's specifically pointed towards evaluating construction practices that would be considered green, like trenchless, low-packed construction technology or recycled materials, those types of things. We don't see a lot of people sign up for that, but there is some evaluation that can be undertaken for green efforts. Item number 3 and 4, water conservation efforts and energy conservation efforts. These two sections tend to be where most people sign up for sustainability efforts here. And so we're looking at evaluating things for water conservation, like installing water meters in unmetered areas, replacing existing broken water meters to upgrading to smart meters, water efficiency faucets. These types of things that are getting towards water conservation efforts are what would be eligible under this section. Section 4, energy conservation. This is probably the highest amount of points we give out. A lot of these items are already being evaluated as part of the facility plan. Things like variable frequency drives on pumps, energy efficiency of motors, and high efficiency lighting. These are things that are becoming more and more common and easily evaluated as part of the facility plan and hopefully translated into a construction project. So on the next slide, these energy conservation efforts, there's a few more on there and you can review those. That takes us into section D. So this has to do with giving points for systems that are really between a rock and hard place. That is, they're under a consent order, a compliance agreement schedule, or a court order. So these are the systems, like Mike alluded to, trying to address the problems that are the highest level of need or the worst problems. And so we've broken it up into several questions here. The first one being low level compliance, potential for 5 points, moderate level compliance, potential for 10 points, or high level non-compliance, potential for 10 points as well. And so you can see the documentation that needs to be included for each one of those. And if you have any questions on where your system might stand, you're more than welcome to reach out to us and we can help you with that. Under the high level compliance, we have a couple of other questions. So that would be CI and CII. And these questions are really intended to provide points, so they're each worth 10 points to systems who have that enforcement action against them. However, the first question is systems that are actively pursuing compliance. These are systems that are working with DEQ to get their system in compliance. And so if that's you, if you fit that, you can get another 10 points there. And then the next one obviously being if the system has satisfied the deadlines and the milestones and the submittal dates associated with the compliance action. So it's common to have in a compliance agreement schedule or a consent order to have a compliance schedule of deadlines. And so if systems have been proactively meeting those deadlines and have satisfied all those deadlines, there's an opportunity to get another 10 points there. So those two questions, again, are just trying to incentivize and provide points towards systems that are really actively pursuing compliance even though they're out of compliance. All right, next slide. This gets us to section E, which are bonus points, incentive points. And these are pretty similar. If you've ever filled out an LOI before, it talks about having a source water protection plan, cross connection control, and the system being free of significant deficiencies on its last sanitary survey. On the next slide, we've got actually a new question. That's question number 6, and it asks if in the past year, if all of the active members of your controlling government, so that'd be your city council or your water board, those types of controlling governments, if those active members have completed at least 3 professional development credits and include the documentation. And so this is intended to incentivize city councils and water boards to continue learning and to developing that technical and managerial capacity at the government level. So we're looking forward to seeing what you all have in terms of providing documentation and being able to provide those points to you. So next slide here, we're going to turn this over to Charlie, and he's going to talk a little bit about affordability.
Thanks, Nicholas. If any of you have ever filled out letters of interest on our loans, you know that we provide some principal forgiveness on the loan side of things. So in an effort to help out disadvantaged systems on the grant sides, we're providing points for disadvantaged status on the grants as well. So this is partially implemented last year with a little bit more of how to do this. First question is how many EDUs you have. This is the current number of EDUs. The second one, what is your current user rate? If you have just a fixed rate, put that. If you have a fixed and a variable rate, try to give us your best guess of what the average rate is. And then if you were to implement some changes, what kind of O&M changes would you expect? And then to figure out exactly where your MHI is, I am going to do my best to see if I can break my laptop and share my screen and show you how to determine this. So to figure out the MHI for your system, you'll go to the censusreporter.org/locate and put in an address for one of the systems or one of the addresses for your system. So to run an example by, I'm going to put in the address of the DEQ state office here, and it will show you the point on the map of the address you just entered. And on the left is several different areas that you can choose from to select your MHI. So what we're looking for is an MHI that is most applicable to the system that is submitting the LOI. And it kind of depends on the system itself. If it's just, the city, then you'll most likely use the city name. For this example on the left, you'd see I could select Boise City as the area. If it's a district, then maybe it's the county that would be representative of the ratepayers, or maybe like it's a district or an association, and maybe you could go with the zip code of the ratepayers. And so that is how you will find the maps on the census reporter to determine what your MHI is. So for the example that I drafted up, I'm going to click on the 83706. So this is just assuming that we're submitting an LOI that's representing the 83706 ratepayers. You would scroll down a little bit and you would see an MHI 57664. And so if you were to, the minimum threshold for disadvantaged status is 2% of the MHI. So you would take your MHI times 0.02% divided by 12, and you would get about $96 a month per ratepayer. So if you're currently paying $96 per month, if that's your actual average user rate, then you would qualify for disadvantage status and get some extra points on the LOI. When you do submit the LOI, please either take a screenshot of this or send us the link that you use to determine which MHI you are using. And that way we can verify that the MHI that you use seems to match up and is applicable to the system that you are submitting the LOHI or the LOI for. I think that is it for the affordability. I believe it goes back to Nicholas.
All right, thanks, Charlie. So we are going to that takes us kind of through the integrated priority rating system for the drinking water LOI. So we're going to just kind of jump ship a little bit to the wastewater, the clean water planning grant form. And we're not going to go into detail for the clean water planning grant form. We're just going to let you know that it looks and feels basically the same. It follows the same process as the drinking water planning grant. If you look at the next slide here, it's going to look basically the same. We're asking for the same information. One thing I will highlight that's not on this screen is we have a similar trigger question as Mike had commented earlier on the drinking water forms. There's a trigger question for for lead service line inventories if you want to include that as part of your drinking water planning grant. On the wastewater side, we have a trigger question that asks if you want to specifically include an I&I, an inflow and infiltration evaluation as part of your wastewater planning grant. Many wastewater facility plans already include this type of analysis of the collection system. Commonly involves flow monitoring. It can include some camera inspection, smoke testing, trying to quantify the inflow and infiltration into your collection system. So we've got a separate pot of money through the sewer overflow and stormwater grant potentially this year that we could potentially supplement or add to a wastewater planning grant. So that might be one way if you're planning on doing an I&I evaluation, it might be one way to increase the available funding from DEQ towards your wastewater planning grant. So you pair those two together. So if that's the instance, if that's the case, we do have, as Mike alluded to, some training on those supplemental LOIs that you could pair with us from last week. There's a link to those in the comments. If you have any questions on with that funding or how to fill out those forms and pair that with the wastewater planning grant or the drinking water planning grant, please reach out to us and we can help with that. Otherwise, these wastewater planning grant forms do follow the same process as the drinking water planning grant forms. Once you get into section 2, the integrated priority rating system, the questions are going to follow almost identically, will follow the wastewater loan questions. And so if you're curious on getting some specific details on how to fill out the wastewater planning grant LOI forms, we do have some training specific to the wastewater for the loans that will follow the same questions and give you some insight in how to answer those questions. And that training will also be provided as a link in the chat box. And so if you're curious to learn more about the questions for the wastewater, clean water side, click on that link and it'll take you to some training we did a couple weeks ago with those details. Otherwise, that gets us to the end of the planning, wastewater planning and drinking water planning grant LOI forms. Takes us to the last section, which is actually submitting the form. And so LaDawn is going to talk a little bit about that.
All right, so this is the last section on the form. Make sure it's completed. I will look for this when they're submitted to make sure that everything has been filled in and there's a name on this. So that one's quick and easy. And then the submittal deadline is January 13th, 2023. So coming up very quickly. They can be sent in electronically to the grants and loans email address. We switched that up just from my email address this year just to make sure that if I'm out of the office or something like that, that somebody's noticing these coming in and we're getting them all logged and we don't miss anything. So make sure that you submit them to that grants and loans email address. If you have any general questions about the LOIs or are looking for technical assistance with help filling out the letters of interest this year, please send us an email to that email address and we will get back to you on how to go about getting technical assistance for that. Also, once you have submitted the letter of interest, I will respond to those and to anybody CC'd on that email submission within at least 1 business day. And if you don't hear back from me, check your spam folder because maybe it went to that, or give me a call at the number here or send another email to our grants and loans email to make sure that we got the submission. All right, and just a refresher on our state office contacts. So for drinking water loans, emergency funding, the lead line service replacement, Charlie is a good contact for that information. For the clean water loans, Alicia is a good contact. And then for the drinking water and wastewater planning grants is Zoe. And then for any general questions, like I highlighted previously, use that grants and loans email and we will disperse those out to the proper person to get back to you. All right, and then our regional office contacts. So for those of you that are getting ready to submit these, if you want the letter of interest looked over ahead of time or you have some specific questions, you can contact the regional office and they should be able to help you with those questions. And then our last side, so the LOI forms and blank rating forms are available at our website and a folder, and I will link those in the chat here in just a little bit. And then just another reminder, they're due January 13th by the end of the day. And for general questions, the grants and loans. So if you have any questions about what we've gone over today, please put those questions in the chat now, and I will direct them to be answered. Or if you would like to ask questions directly, I will unmute you and make that available, and you can directly ask your questions. So when do we have to show our proof of funds to match the grant?
So there is a question on the LOI that you'll just signify either yes or no that you have the ability to do the other 50%. Obviously, if you don't, then you won't be able to move forward with a grant. So we're looking for just a yes or no. Can you do it? We're not looking for bank statements or any kind of proof or anything like that. So you'll just mark that yes, you can do your 50% of the engineering report.
This is Mariana. I'll add a little bit to that too. And when we reimburse these planning grants, we pay out 50% of the invoices you receive. So we do a reimbursal and we pay out 50%. So as long as the system's able to come up with the other 50 as they pay out the charges they receive for the planning effort, that will suffice for us.
All right, any other questions? All right, thank you everyone for attending. And if you need to reach out to us, please do so. Or if you have any questions that you think of later, we will be sending out the recording to this at some point today or early tomorrow with all the links and everything there as well. So thank you all for attending.